So, pivoting to our first plenary session, I want to take a moment to welcome our first moderator who's going to kick us off, and that is Maria Pesquera. And Maria is one of our board members, one of our newest board members, but she is also the president of Healthy Communities Foundation, where she's been since 2017. She's an expert in numerous topics, ranging from public-private partnerships to health disparities, immigration reform, women and family issues, violence prevention, and the future of philanthropy. We are thrilled that she is going to be leading this important discussion as we think about where philanthropy is going, what are the needs and the challenges that we have to face, and how we can evolve to achieve better outcomes. So with that, I will turn it over to Maria, who will introduce our speakers and take us into today's first topic. Maria?
Great. Thanks, Kara. And hello, and welcome to this year's Grant Makers in Health Virtual Conference. Thank you all for joining us today in this opening plenary discussion. As Kara mentioned, my name is Maria Pesquera, and I'm the president of the Healthy Communities Foundation, a health conversion foundation that seeks to measurably improve the health and well-being of individuals, families, and communities in Chicago and its surrounding western suburbs, specifically those experiencing the greatest health inequities. I'm honored to be moderating the discussion that you are about to hear. And as you know, since last year, we've experienced a devastating public health crisis that has lifted the veil on longstanding racial, ethnic, and health inequities that has impacted the long-term health and economic stability of communities, especially Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and other communities of color. We've also heard the calls for racial equity and justice across the country in the aftermath of a wave of police brutality. And in philanthropy, we've seen swift and fundamental changes to policies and practices which have proven that we could adapt quickly to align to community needs. As philanthropic organizations, we're all being called to do more, to use our power and privilege to reimagine our practices to meet the needs of this moment. And so, as we come together at this year's Grant Makers in Health Conference, it gives us an opportunity to discuss ideas, share learnings, and seek ways to build better practices that lead to a more just, equitable, and healthy future for all of us. It's my honor to introduce our esteemed panel that will open this year's conference and set the tone for the types of conversations and ideas that will be shared during these next few days. First, we have Melissa Berman, who is the founding president and CEO of Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, an innovative nonprofit philanthropy service whose mission is to help donors create thoughtful, effective philanthropy throughout the world by developing strategic plans, conducting research, managing foundations and trusts, and much more. Melissa has led Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors since 2001, building it into one of the world's leading philanthropic advisory, grant-making, research, and project management services. Also on the panel, we have Kathleen Enright, who is the president and CEO of the Council of Foundations, a member organization that fosters an environment where philanthropy can thrive and cultivates communities of diverse and skilled philanthropic professionals and organizations who lead with integrity, serve as ethical stewards, and advocate for progress. Kathleen joins the council after 17 years as president and CEO of Grant Makers for Effective Organizations. We also have Crystal Haling, who is the executive director of the Libra Foundation, which partners with groups working towards justice and equity that center the voices and experiences of those disproportionately harmed by systemic oppression. Prior to joining the Libra Foundation, Crystal was the CEO of the Blue Foundation. Of the Blue Shield of California Foundation, where she spearheaded work to achieve universal health coverage and also a part of the founding team at the California Wellness Foundation. And last but not least, we have Brenda Solorzano, a fellow board member of Grantmakers in Health, and who is the chief executive of the Headwaters Foundation, a health conversion foundation that is committed to promoting the health and wellness of Western Montanans. It's based in Missoula and has the potential to positively transform the overall health of people in the 15 counties of Western Montana by creating sustainable system-wide change in healthcare systems and services. Brenda is a strategy, evaluation, program, and grant-making guru with an eye toward local collaboration and a keen sense that change happens when communities come together to engage in good work. And so let's begin with our opening question for each of you. At the Healthy Communities Foundation, we often reflect upon a quote from Race Forward that goes, "Achieving racial equity is both a process and an outcome." As philanthropic organizations, some of us have been or have embarked on what is an ever-evolving equity journey. There's much to learn and unlearn. This past year has affirmed the need for our sector to center racial equity and justice in its practices, especially in health philanthropy, as we clearly saw just how interconnected the social determinants of health are. So, could each of you talk to us about how your organization's journey has committed to addressing racial, ethnic, and health equity this past year and beyond? So let's begin with Melissa.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and to be part of this panel, and I really thank Grantmakers in Health for the invitation. Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, as Maria so accurately put it, is a service organization in philanthropy. We work with individual donors and families, as well as with corporations and institutional donors, and we work around the world. So this gives us an interesting kind of perspective. And I'd say that our response to the pandemics that we have been facing over the last 18 months, roughly, of both COVID and the racial injustices and violence that we've been seeing everywhere, began with an op-ed that one of my colleagues, Renee Karibi-White, wrote about breathing. And we have tried to use that metaphor internally in our organization to help one another breathe through this. And we have tried to use that externally, so to speak, with the donors we work with to help encourage them to take a deep breath and step back. Just to give you a couple concrete examples, we partner with the Ford Foundation on a criminal justice reform initiative, and over the last year, our combined grant-making teams have really focused on getting more money into organizations led by individuals who have been adversely affected by the U.S. justice system, and into getting more funds directly into the hands of individuals through various direct giving options. So that's one example. We have also really tried with our global foundation learning community to open this conversation up. It's held differently in different parts of the world, of course, and we've tried to open those conversations up to broader groups. I would say for individual donors, which is a part of philanthropy that Grantmakers in Health is often sort of adjacent to, that as Maria put it, a veil has been lifted for many people. And we've been trying to help them take that deep breath and take that first step onto the on-ramp of thinking differently about the world that they're trying to make better. And so we've been able to have opportunities to help individuals, families, groups use the frameworks of racial equity and justice, and in particular to increase general operating support and have fewer strings and faster decisions, to do more work that's directly linked to these issues as they see the connections in their prior commitments, to put money into the hands of organizations and individuals that are very close to and integral to the communities that are most affected. And finally, to be open to the whole field of direct giving, which has an unusual kind of disruptive promise for a lot of the work that we do. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Kathleen?
Oh, thank you so much, Maria. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with these amazing leaders. And congratulations, Kara, on the conference and on your leadership. I am just excited about this conversation. And I have to say, I was excited to join the council in part because of the important role that I think the council has to play in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in philanthropy. And I wanted to be part of that. So, the council, I'm going to talk about our journey in two parts. The council is a membership organization. So I will talk about how this work has affected our members, and then I will talk a little bit about how it affects us internally. And you will probably hear some themes. Apparently, Melissa and I have been friends and colleagues for too long, because we're even going to use, some of the same words that I was thinking about, she's already using. So I think you're going to hear a lot of echoes of the same themes. We're lucky at the council to have a lot of our members who are grant makers that are focused on health equity, equity in the broadest definition of the term, and who view it in a variety of viewpoints. And as Melissa already rightly pointed out, equity in the global context takes on very different meanings. But we also have a lot of folks who are newer to this work. And as Melissa pointed out, it was like the veil coming back, right? So some are awakening to the new reality that the status quo in our country is not working for a lot of people, particularly Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, the disabled. So to say it plainly, the roots of the massive inequities that were both exposed and exacerbated by COVID are structural, they're systemic, they're pervasive, and they were created through generations of both unintentional actions as well as intentional policies that will require efforts that are at similar scale, sophistication, and duration to undo. So that's a big deal. But the good news is it plays to philanthropy's strengths. We have the ability to be in it for the long haul. So for those that are new to seeing the system, we're hoping that it is leading, and it is, we're watching it lead some of these philanthropic institutions to be deeply introspective about their core purpose and their role. And it ultimately has them recentering values to focus on partnership, to think about how they can't do it alone, to think about how they need to be advocates in a different way, how they need to change the way that they're giving their resources. And for many, and hopefully most, it's led to a recognition that we have our own work to do. We need to change ourselves as organizations. We need to be way more culturally competent. We need to look at our own composition as a field and as institutions. And we need to open up. We need to open up and let others in order to be able to do this work well and make better decisions. And also we need to work harder to build the equity in the systems that we care about, like child welfare and healthcare and domestic violence and the like. So this is sort of how it's affecting, the members that we're talking to. And at the council, of course, we are on our own very deep journey, and we're making progress. And probably like you, the pace is slow and the path is not linear. And at times it is frustrating, and it feels like we are not doing a good enough job. And I will say that I am a Professionally, I mean, I'm personally and professionally influenced by Equity in the Center and their terrific work, Awake to Woke to Work. And so, you know, I'm thinking about how we get brilliant on the basics of that, you know, policies and systems and people and processes, and, you know, how we think about what the board's work is that they need to do, and what the leadership's work is and what we need to do, and what the full staff team's work is and what we all need to do, so that we are committed and staying on the journey, because this is probably the most important work that we're engaged in at the moment. So we're doing things like looking at our structures, looking at pay equity, benefits, how professional development and opportunities come up and arise. We're trying to make our walls more permeable, so that a broader group of people are influencing the council's strategy. We're hoping that we are able to get more, you know, just more voices able to shape our work, because we know that better decisions get made that way. So it's our intent, you know, to welcome everyone in our membership as we're reaching out and doing our work on diversity, equity, and inclusion wherever you are. And we're trying to be patient, and as Melissa said, take those deep breaths when we aren't feeling like we are where we wish we were. And we are committed to being a bit of an on-ramp to diversity, equity, and inclusion for our field and for our members, so that they can then get going and then be opened up to the amazing resources and tools that they're going to need to be on the journey for the long haul from our very strong sector partners like Equity in the Center and ABFI and APIP and HIP and GEO and the so many others who can help them along on the various legs of their journey.
Thanks, Kathleen. If we could next hear from Crystal.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, excuse me, to join you for this. I'm an old Grant Makers in Health member. So a long time ago, when I was at the Wellness Foundation, Healthcare Foundation, and heading up the Blue Shield of California Foundation, always a member. And it's so great to be back in this community and talking about these issues. So I'm now the executive director of the Libra Foundation, which is a family foundation. And we're based in San Francisco when we work in social justice in general Broadway. But let me just tell you a little bit about how we came to be doing this work, because I think it weighs in on the topic that we're talking about today. When I joined the foundation, the family was, it's 6 members, Nick and Susan Pritzker and their 4 adult kids. They're the board of the foundation. And they were really interested in human rights. It was sort of the overarching theme of the whole foundation. And when I interviewed for the job, I shared with them that my perspective was that if you were working on human rights, and the majority of the work that you're doing is domestic, right? So 90% of the foundation's resources go to programs in the United States. Then we had to be thinking about a racial justice lens as being the overarching theme for the entire foundation. Because in America, race is the sorting hat. And so that's how we decide who gets human rights and who does not, who has full participation in our democracy and who does not, who has access to resources, as we saw with COVID, and who does not. So that's really the way we've begun to shift our entire work. We work in the areas of environmental justice, criminal justice reform, and gender justice. And this has really been the primary area that we do, is to bring that racial justice lens, recognizing that if we're not thinking about race, centering race all the time, then we're actually working on the fringes. And the way to do this work has to be to center equity and to move from there out, as opposed to thinking about working on the fringes and hoping that we eventually get into the center. I would say that we also have shifted our work, despite the fact that we were doing really wonderful work and had a foundation, a portfolio that represented amazing organizations. What we didn't have was a portfolio that represented largely BIPOC-led organizations. And let me just say why that is important for us to have done that shift. When we think about how we define the issues of health equity, when we define the issues of gender and environmental justice, the language that is used in our professional organizations is quite different than the language that might be used by folks in the communities that are most impacted by this issue. And so it's important for us to use their language, to listen to them and to help them to have the resources to address those issues. And that's really the work that we've been trying to do, is to fund more BIPOC-led organizations. Many of them don't necessarily have health, public health in their name. They may not even say that in their mission statement, but in the way in which they are beginning to bring community empowerment into their work, they're so squarely in that work that we need to think about how we fund them. And that is the way that we begin to create alignment with community-based organizations, with folks who are building their power, and with the folks who are most impacted by the issues and therefore have the most wisdom, expertise on the issues to bring to bear on the issues. So we'll talk a little bit later about some of the initiatives that we've done, but that just gives you an overview. And again, so delighted to be here and be in this conversation with these amazing women.
Thanks, Crystal. Next, you'll hear from Brenda.
Greetings, everyone. It's a real privilege to be with this set of wonderful leaders today at the GIH annual conference, and want to appreciate all of you across the country, all my GIH colleagues and friends. I want to, go back to Maria, what you said, which is equity is a journey. It's a process, and you have to start somewhere, and it's best to start wherever it is that you need to start. And so for Headwaters, our equity journey is unique to our own history, our culture, and the environment in which we operate. So I work at Headwaters, which is located in Montana. We are a state that is predominantly white, but if we look at our health data, we clearly see that health disparities exist in our communities. In fact, one of the striking things I learned when I came to Montana was that if Montana did a better job at addressing the health disparities among American Indians in our community, we would rank overall as a state much better, because American Indians in our community tend to die a generation younger than the rest of the population in our state. And even though those health disparities are clearly present in our state, we did not start the conversation at Headwaters focused on race. We started instead on thinking about how you build trusting relationships. How do you build trust and connection among board, among staff, with our grantee partners and the communities that we work with and the people who have the lived experience. We focused on trying to figure out ways to build psychological safe spaces and skills for engaging in challenging conversations. And we started here because it was an easier, safer space to start for our particular region. Our board and our staff are still working on finding out ways to create those safe spaces. We've made progress, but just this morning I was having a conversation with my board officers about how they were aware that in several board conversations there were topics that had been raised related to isms that they felt uncomfortable raising, even though we have worked very hard at creating a safe space, even though we have worked very hard at building the skills of our board and our staff to engage in these conversations. So we're still not there, but this is where we started, because we could not engage in a conversation around race and race equity until we actually had that psychological trusting space, those relationships to engage in what sometimes can be very difficult and divisive conversations. What I have been able to see, which I think gives me hope, is that There has, through this work, been at Headwaters and in Montana, an opportunity for us to actually come to these conversations with more authenticity and more transparency. And this has allowed us to now examine not only race, but also power, and who has historically sat at the decision-making tables in this country, in this state, and at our foundation. And how are we actually going to be doing the work to figure out ways to create space at that table, to maybe even remove ourselves from that table and allow people with lived experience, people that represent those underserved and underrepresented communities to be engaged in making the decisions for themselves.
Thank
What
you.
I can,
Oh,
what
I'm
I-
sorry.
What I want to also share is that we have most recently gotten our board to say that they are interested in doing an equity audit. And I am really excited about a foundation in Missoula, Montana, agreeing to do an equity audit and be able to explore the issue of race equity. But I can tell you that had we not done the previous work around trust and psychological safety and transparency, we would not be able to do this work. I don't know where this work is going to take us, but I can tell you that we are open to whatever implications will be raised for us at Headwaters and what it means to really do the important work of health equity. And I'm looking forward to continuing to be in this conversation with all of you because it's a journey that we've just started and one that I'm happy to share more about and learn from others.
Thank you, Brenda. Truly appreciate the comments around, let's breathe, Melissa, right? Let's think differently, right, Kathleen? And as we unramp, as we ramp up, we need to center race, not be in the fringes, Crystal, and Brenda, the importance of trust. Thank you for centering us as we continue this conversation. And speaking of continuing our conversation, this next question for us to think about is we think of the vaccine rollout and distribution beginning across the country. We've heard much frustration coming from communities of color about inequitable vaccine distribution. Just a year before, given inequitable access to COVID-19 testing, community partners and organizations were warning health departments and funders about the pattern repeating itself once vaccines were available. And unfortunately, we saw it play out in many parts of this country. So, Crystal, this question is for you. When we talk about reimagining public health and our role as funders, what can philanthropy do to center community voice and lived experience in our grant-making practices?
It's a great question. And one of the things that we talk a lot about in our work is the importance of bringing an intersectional lens to the conversation. So we did not just experience a COVID pandemic last year. We experienced multiple traumatic pandemics last year. And it is important for us to bring George Floyd's name into this room, to bring the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that all of us experienced last year as a shared national trauma, and to really reflect on what that meant for us. When I think about what it meant for me, I know that I lost a lot of sleep last year. I lost a lot of sleep partly because I had to, as an African-American woman with 2 teenage boys, I had to confront the fact that there is the possibility that random, state-sponsored, potentially even violence, death could happen to me and my family, and there's nothing I could do about it. COVID also presented that same experience for all of us, that we were terrified that we couldn't keep our families safe. We should not gloss over, as we move to being vaccinated and reopening, the fact that that has now been an experience we've all had. So what does that mean? What does that teach us? One of the things it teaches us is that as we went through all of that, both of those multiple pandemics, we experienced powerlessness. Many of us experienced depression. Many of us experienced feelings of of being disassociated from the rest of society. Those are the experiences of not having the ability to have agency in your life. And in order to have a healthy life, you have to be able to have agency. So to me, one of the things that really came out from last year is that public health must be much more involved in the area of community organizing and power building. Brenda really touched on this, and Kathleen and Melissa also touched on this in terms of what our institutions have to be willing to let go of in terms of our own authority and power making and decision making. This is really fundamentally important. So after last summer, I was really very concerned after having 30 plus years of experience in philanthropy that we were all going to experience what had happened to George Floyd. And then philanthropy was going to take another year or two to study it, to get trained up on it, to think about it some more. And we don't have that kind of time. And so what we did at the Libra Foundation is we launched the Democracy Frontlines Fund, which was an effort to move money first and learn as we go. And I think this is a critically important lesson for us to learn and to continue to practice. Too often in philanthropy, we have a bias to study. We want to think about it for another 20 years. We want to be convinced it's the best strategy before we go into it. And in fact, one of the most powerful ways that we learn, and really and truly, most people who talk about adult education talk about this methodology, is act first and then learn as we go. So the Democracy Frontlines Fund, which we invited other foundations to join us in saying, let's fund Black-led organizing, people who are at the absolute front lines of defending our democracy, of defining our democracy, of protecting it and fighting for it. Let's fund them with 3 years of general operating support. And then all of us will come together and be on a learning journey together about what those organizations are doing, how they're doing that work. It was also important for us because we put together a brain trust of leaders who fund movement building work, who fund Black-led groups. And we gave them the authority to make the decision about which grantees would be selected to receive the funds. So as foundations, we stepped back. We invited the Brain Trust members to come in to make the decision about the slate of organizations. And we put $36 million over 3 years towards those organizations. And it has been and is currently a transformative experience. We are meeting on a quarterly basis. We're talking with our grantee partners. We're learning about the issues from their language, even when it makes us really uncomfortable. We're about to have a conversation about defunding the police. Wow, okay, that's really hard for lots of funders to think about and talk about. But it's really important. One of the grantees is the National Black Food and Justice Alliance. Why is that organization part of a democracy funding? Why would that be public health leaning? Why would anybody fund that? They're going to talk to us about the fact of the way in which Black folks have had land loss at an unbelievable rate over the last 100 years, and what that means for us in terms of food and justice and community and health. One of the grantees is the Highlander Center for Education, which is one of the largest, oldest organizations in the South, focusing on Black land and liberation and education around anti-racism. These are the kinds of organizations we're now in partnership with and learning from. And it is a bold effort. It's early days, but it is having a profound impact on how we see ourselves as funders, how we engage with our grantee partners. This is one of the first times where I can honestly say that our partners think of us as partners. We funded Black Voters Matter, which is an organization that does not itself have people fill out forms to register to vote. What they're focused on is changing the culture of voting in communities, convincing people, being in partnership and relationship with people, to say to Black people, to Latinx people, to Indigenous people, voting matters. And you can be part of what this democracy is and continue to build it to be what we all want it to be. So I would say that for us, what COVID has taught us is also what the racial reckoning has taught us, that these are intersectional, intertwined issues, and that it is really important for us to move more money to groups and communities that are led by people most impacted, right? Not the ones that are on a long journey, not the ones who are, well, we're going to get around to diversifying our board in a few years. Really beginning to dramatically shift the percentage of those organizations and the percentage of your funds and your grantee pools that are going to Black-led, BIPOC-led organizations. This has a profound impact on your learning journey. And it also is the way in which we get out of the habit of taking so long that by the time we've actually massaged the issue and convinced ourselves, we've missed the opportunity to be catalysts for change. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Crystal, for as we think about the role and the importance of empowering or and putting trust in with our money early on. So thank you. Next, as we think about, and I know we've been talking about the racial reckoning and the pandemic together that has taken place in the spotlight that that the role on the role the systemic policies have placed, as well as investment patterns that have played in creating health inequities in many communities. So so thank you, Crystal, for putting us on that in that place at this moment. So this next question from that same perspective goes to you, Melissa, as we think about, well, this is not a new practice to the sector. This past year, impact investing has become an important topic, having many of us take a closer look at our investment portfolio. That some of us have made some shifts already in the types of investments that we're making to ensure that we are investing in companies and funds that can generate social or environmental impact as well as financial returns. Could you share with us the role that philanthropy as well as individuals and families can have in impact investing as well as beyond grant making to address systemic change?
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Great question. I also want to thank Crystal for making us all remember the death of George Floyd and the urgency that creates. That's important for us to hold. I think that all of the members of Grantmakers in Health have been aware of things like social determinants of health, what systems change means for a very long time, and have been leaders in this kind of work. But I think that when we ask ourselves what we need to do in this moment, we need to start to talk about systems change for ourselves. And we need to think about what is the systems change that we can bring to the system of a funding organization, right? So it's not just the, so to speak, the software part of it, which is the issues we care about, how we frame those issues, et cetera, what our programs are, but the hardware of what happens with the money that underpins all of this, right? And we're used to thinking about grants and in-kind donations and expertise and advocacy as very familiar tools. But we need to also think about the systemic challenges that live in the market environment. And to look at all of the assets of a funder and the entire balance sheet, right? We can't make this artificial separation anymore between the money that we spend and the money that we save. Just as we can't make an artificial separation anymore between the principles we espouse and the actions that we take, as Crystal reminded us. So I think that we have a growing range of options, fortunately, for how to map the field of investing, just as you would map any other kind of issue, across all of your assets, while maintaining the power of your asset base, if you choose to do it that way, in using a variety of different kinds of tools. So at the simplest level is obviously screening out organizations that are pernicious to your mission. And those might include not just tobacco companies, but private prisons, right? And it might also include putting your funds into ESG pools, which are convenient, cheap, and easy, right? It might include loans and bonds and other kinds of fixed income investments that go directly into community-led organizations to BIPOC-led organizations. There's no reason you can't do that on the investing side, just as you're doing on the grant-making side. Public equity similarly offers opportunities like that. And then if you have risk tolerance comfort, there are ways to get into private equity and to help women and BIPOC business creators get better access to the capital markets. Women get 3% of venture capital funding, 3% now. The numbers are even lower for people of color. That's just not acceptable. And although philanthropy doesn't own that money, much of the assets in the marketplace, we own enough to start to make a difference, and we should be able to make a difference with what we have. We can think about who our vendors are, right? We can think about how we use our voice, not just about the issues and about grantees, but about the market system, about the investing system, about how we think about what counts as a return. We have enormous capacity to look at how we use money with a very different kind of systems lens than in the past. And that includes entrusting money to organizations and leaders, as Crystal has said. It includes giving directly to individuals, and it includes investing in ways that change how the market operates. I think that we talk a lot about policy, and clearly that's extremely important, but in this country, for sure, market forces are extremely powerful, and we need to be able to have influence on that, also to make real the change that we want to see. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. As Brenda and Crystal have stated, one of the fundamental aspects of relationship is trust. And this is especially true when it comes to building relationships and partnerships with community. Kathleen, if you could perhaps talk to us a little bit about this question. Many in the sector are talking about the importance of trust and trusted partnerships. How do you build trust, particularly in a time when our country is so divided? If you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure, that seems like the fundamental question, doesn't it? And it's the nut to crack, and it's one that I hope that we will all engage in together. You know, it's incredibly important, and I just want to think about for a minute, why is it so important for philanthropy to be a trusted partner? And, you know, it just makes sense because trust is at the heart of everything. It's at the heart of positive relationships, of high functioning organizations, of flourishing communities. You know, in fact, it's at the heart of a thriving democracy, or it can be part of what makes a democracy struggle and stumble, as we are seeing in our own country at the moment. But unfortunately, right now, philanthropy is not seen as a trusted partner to nonprofits in some cases and communities in some cases. In fact, we're living in a failing trust ecosystem. If you read the Edelman Trust Index, trust in institutions is at an all-time low. And make no mistake, foundations right now and those who create them, not health conversions are kind of a little bit an outlier because you're created in a different way. But those foundations that are created by individuals of wealth, those with concentrated wealth and power, are getting additional scrutiny, and the critics are getting louder. And those critics are coming from both the left and the right in terms of politically. So, and that additionally is another reason why trust is hard to build, because trust is tied up in power and race and class and political ideology. So you've got to bridge all of those things to get to trust. I loved the story that Brenda told about working with her board to start with that baseline before she could even get to some of these other conversations that she wanted to have. And I am sure she sped up her equity journey by starting there rather than slowing it down. So, you know, I guess the first thing that I will say is that this is not a time where we can stay in our spaces where everyone agrees. This is not a time where we can kind of get into our own echo chambers that are really comfortable. But we need to be in those places where we get uncomfortable, where we are in spaces where we're with folks who are of divergent views and opinions, who make us uncomfortable. And the intent of those spaces might not be to convert the other people. It might just be to import empathy. It might just be to see them as humans, to see them for their full humanity. And that might be enough to be in those spaces. But then the other kinds of ways, you know, to grow trust, there's so many different dimensions for how we need to do this. And you've been hearing the cues and clues from my fellow panelists across the conversation here. You know, there's the practical, tactical ways. I bet you many of you have heard of the Trust Philanthropy Project. Brenda is a founding member of this. It grew out of a lot of grant makers who were doing some of those fundamental practices that matter inordinately to the nonprofit organizations on the ground. And some of those grant makers came to the council at the early days of COVID and said, will you help us, along with the Ford Foundation, issue this pledge of some of those practices and more. And so we did, and the principles of this pledge are things like making new grants unrestricted, making that the standard for grants, or if they're restricted now in COVID, unrestrict them, eliminate those restrictions. Support organizations, as Crystal said, created and led by communities most affected by the work that you're doing. The themes that are coming up in this conversations are the principles of the pledge that we issued. And those are a lot of the ones that the Trust Philanthropy Project has been touting for many years. Brenda looks like she wants to get in. Oh no, you just came off mute. I'd be glad for you to join in. I like the idea of a back and forth.
I will, as soon as, because I want to bounce off of some of the things that you're saying in my.
No, go ahead. If Maria will allow it, I would love for you.
So I go right ahead. Brenda was actually going to follow up on the very same topic. So why don't you go ahead, Brenda? Thank you.
Yeah, so I want to jump in here because I think I've been a longtime member of GIH. Over 20 years, I've been coming to GIH events and have been a health funder for a long time. And I think this field in particular has really focused on these evidence-based outcome metrics, research, data, experts telling communities what needs to be done. And I've been part of that. I have worked on projects that did exactly all of those things. And what we have learned is that none of that worked because we are still having things happen like George Floyd's murder. We are still having health disparities across various communities. And if we've been doing this work, at least for 20 years, and nothing's changing on this health equity front, then I've kind of had to ask myself, what do we need to do differently in philanthropy? Because what we have been doing isn't working. And I like the idea of not only thinking about equity in terms of the programming that we do, but as Melissa said, turning the mirror into our internal operations. And so asking ourselves, what if we shifted away from gatekeeping roles? What if we eliminated the power that we have, or ceded the power that we have, and let communities make decisions? And how do we move away from us defining as funders what success looks like, and letting the nonprofits that are really doing the mission critical on the ground work define what success will look like? And if you really start from this place of reimagining, like what it could look different, and how do you implement the tools that are part of trust-based practices, you might actually get to a different outcome, because what we've been doing, as I said, hasn't worked. And so this notion of trust-based philanthropy is a lot more than just these principles. It is a values-driven approach that really you need to take the entirety of how you operate and how you do your work, your grant making, your board work, your investment, your HR work, and really ground it in this notion of trust. And that if you're actually applying that lens in a values-driven way, then you're going to be doing your work differently. That's what trust-based is. It's more than just with my God, the multi-year general operating support, or eliminating the bureaucracy. It's this values-driven approach that we're going to engage in this work very differently. And if I can, Maria, just share a couple of different examples of how we've operationalized this at Headwaters. And I can tell you that it's going to look at every foundation, it's going to look differently in terms of what your trust-based work looks like. For us at Headwaters, one of the things that we really wanted to work on is how do we really start from a place of trust and really believe in the people that have been doing this important on the ground work way longer than Headwaters has existed. So we came up with this program that we call the Go Grant Program. And the way it works is similar to the way that credit cards work, right? So you can get a credit card based on a FICO score that talks about how you have previously performed as a borrower of money. And based on that, the board the bank instantaneously grants you money. Well, why can't philanthropy work that way? The Go Grants are an example of how it can work that way. It takes about 10 minutes to apply. Organizations enter some basic information. Our automated system looks at the IRS database to confirm that it's a 501c3, to confirm that it's an organization in our region, to check to make sure that it's a mission-aligned organization. And if they are, our theory is we should therefore fund this important work. And so we do. We can approve those grants in 24 hours and get a check into a bank account of a nonprofit organization in 2 weeks. I've never ever seen that be done in philanthropy, but it is really a different business model that eliminates or attempts to eliminate the power dynamic. Starts from a place of trust. We don't actually go out and do due diligence and site visits and all these other things. We know that these organizations have been operating in Montana for the last number of years doing mission-aligned work with us. Let's just get out of the way. Let's just let people do the important work, which is what Crystal is doing with saying, let's just give the money to the BIPOC leaders that are leading this racial equity work. That's what we need to be doing.
And so that is beautiful, Brenda. And you just stole my closing line, which was lead with trust. And I was going to say that, that was what Crystal was saying. And it's actually the tagline for Charles Koch's Philanthropy Stand Together. They talk about the giving the onus to the people in the community to make the decisions, that let's trust the people closest to the ground and those with lived experience. So this is becoming a sort of universal or more widely accepted understanding. And, one of the things that became clear to me a long time ago when I was wondering why, sometimes people in the boardrooms of foundations were making decisions that just were going sideways for the communities that they were attempting to support. And it was never because they wanted that to happen, right? It was because there were too many gaps in worldview and experience and just distance between them and the folks on the ground. I mean, that was just the basic reason. And so you just got to close those gaps. There were gaps between those folks and the nonprofits they were supporting, and then there were gaps between the nonprofits they were supporting and the folks who were actually receiving the ultimate benefit. So this is a way to close those gaps.
Great, thanks. Kathleen, as you mentioned, and as we all know, we're in this virtual conference, and hopefully soon we'll all be meeting in person. And in the meantime, the Zoom world and Teams world and such have created a space for us to continue to have these conversations. And in trying to have these, if we were in person, trying to have these conversations in a style where we can go back and forth. I love that, Kathleen. If perhaps in that same spirit, as we're moving forward and we're seeing that light at the end of this tunnel. For our closing conversation, or before we go to Q&A, and I think we've started this, Brenda and Kathleen, you've started this, and perhaps if we could have Crystal and Melissa also jump in on this 1 to 2 priorities that philanthropy should focus on this coming year as we continue to work towards recovery and better health through philanthropy. And perhaps if we just all, the 4 of us, unmute ourselves to have this conversation for the next 3 to 5 minutes or so before we go into Q&A.
Well, I'll jump in and just start again with this idea of thinking about how you fund more BIPOC-led organizations. And the reason I, again, come back to that idea and how to do more of that work is, one of the things that happened when I started calling funders to invite them to join the Democracy Frontlines Fund. I'm calling, foundation CEOs I've known for years and years, and we have established relationships. And I just really recall one of the very first ones, a white man who said to me, Crystal, we want to do something, we don't know what to do. And it was so refreshing to have that just honesty, to be able to have that kind of a dialogue and to say, yeah, so what is it that we're going to do here, right? And I think that for people who were surprised by George Floyd's murder, if you were surprised, it means that your privilege has allowed you to see only a portion of how this society operates, right? Many of us were horrified, but not surprised. So if it is true that we are seeing privilege create sort of a narrowness to the lens with which we view the world, then perhaps to think about funding more BIPOC-led organizations is really to say, we're actually going to fund people who have greater expertise. They have a wider view of the situation and the problems, and are likely, and I can say in my experience, definitely generating a wider range of solutions than those of us who have a narrower view are going to come up with. So I think that's really what I would say is, there's a justice point of this work and funding more BIPOC-led organizations. And there is an effectiveness point around this work, because it is in fact about finding those organizations with lived experience, which is an actual expertise, which will lead to better outcomes. So that's where I would just sort of say one of the basic practices around that.
Well, Crystal, just to build on what you said, you hit on one point about this, which is funding folks who have the lived experience and expertise to be able to make better decisions. The same is true about adding that intellectual leadership and lived experience into our own leadership structures. So my sense there is that we are all better in our own institutions when we have a broader set of intel and leadership, and that is actually proved out to be true with sector data. So you made the effectiveness point again. We don't need to study it. It is true. It has been shown in the for-profit sector. It has been shown in our sector. We can just say yes and think about how we want to recruit differently and cultivate our internal talent differently so that our C-suite and our board looks far different in 10 years and 20 years.
Any other statements before we go to Q&A from the panel?
I think I would encourage my colleagues who are at the leadership level within foundations, whether that's staff or board, to really explore where are you holding power and what commitment will you make to cede that power. And I'm sure it's going to be an individual answer, but if you can actually spend some time reflecting on that and making a commitment to do one thing to cede that power, I think that could be very powerful if we all did that across the field of philanthropy.
I'd like to follow up on what Brenda said. I think there's tremendous wisdom in that. And I think that part of that way of ceding power could also be really enhanced collaboration across the sector among donors. If we map that system, it's not exactly optimal, and we could streamline a lot, get a lot more out into the hands of the leaders who are deeply engaged with and have the lived experience of the issues we cared about, if we were not each individually mapping the same system and doing the same research and creating the same dockets and all of this kind of stuff. So that's a tremendous opportunity that sits right in front of us. I think the last thought I'd leave for this in terms of thinking about things over the next year is the issues of COVID and indeed of racial equity and justice are global issues. And we have a great opportunity as we map those systems and look to how we want to change our own systems, to think about that context and to think about how we could build more partnerships that would improve equity here in our country and also in other countries.
Absolutely. It has taken a global pandemic for us to be cognizant of the global these global issues that are ultimately affecting our health. We are all interconnected, just as the social determinants of health. My health is connected to your health and your well-being. And as we think about George Floyd, and then on a local level, we could certainly look at in Chicago, the Adam Toledo's, we can say her name and his names all across our country and globally of individuals that have left us with a reminder that we must look at the systemic inequities locally and globally to make a change. So if we could, we've already begun to get some questions, quite a few of them. And one of them, if we could begin with Brenda, specifically on the equity audit that has come up. You touched on the equity audit. Could you talk a little bit about your equity audit, the process, and how you went about providing your support in that audit?
Yeah, so we actually have not started the equity audit work yet at Headwaters. That's how early on we are in this journey. It took us 3 years to get to the point where we had the space and the culture and the trust to be able to say we're ready to now engage in this work. One of the things we did was look across the country and try to figure out who would be best positioned to work in our unique circumstance of who Headwaters is and what the racial equity work will look like in our community. And we have selected a partner that we think will allow us to have the kinds of conversations that we need to have, because we're at the very early start of that process. I think what has been most important from my perspective is my board's willingness to say we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do it and spend the time that it needs, and we're gonna make a commitment to whatever comes out of it to actually follow through. And again, I don't think, to Kathleen's point, I don't think that we would have we're not gonna get as far as we're gonna get if we had not done that previous trust, safe space, relationship building work that we did beforehand.
Well, and can I just add in here that I know just from my observing of the field over a long period of time that one organization that has been doing diversity, equity, and inclusion audit for a long time and is, it's an aspirational place to be. So don't be intimidated if you go look at it and you're not there yet, is the California Endowment. So Han Kao Yu is the brains behind that operation. And it's up on their website. If you just type it in, you'll find it. And it is just an amazing both learning tool as well as an accountability mechanism to their communities. So you can see a model of something that you could aspire to there if you're just getting started.
And along those same lines of the fact that we're certainly in a journey, that it is, as we think about equity being both a process and an outcome. The question from the audience is, what would it take for philanthropy as a sector to collectively commit to specific equity-based outcomes for how we do our work from our internal processes, and to how we allocate our funding, to how we build power and prioritize communities of color? So looking at it from a collective commitment. Any ideas?
I guess I would go back as a starting point and hope that other panelists can chime in with something more intelligent. But I would start off with asking us to think about collaboration and to agreement on some very basic types of industry standards. In addition to my day job, I have the privilege of being on the board of Candid, which is the combination of GuideStar and the Foundation Center. And think about how much collective action could become possible if we started adopting a standard of what information we all require from the organizations that we're about to fund. Brenda has given us a great example of literally automating it, right? But one way to start that process is to start maybe not so much with the output, which could be a little too far down the road for right now, but at least let's start with, we're going to all accept the same kind of inputs, and we're all going to be having the same conversation about that. And the number of, person hours that would be saved among the public charities that we care about is profound, right?
Oh, absolutely. Crystal, you want, you talked earlier about the process internally in this work that you all have taken at the Libra Foundation. And I think Brenda also talked a little bit about what it took to influence her boards and the leadership. But might you talk a little bit, one of the questions is, how did you influence your board's leadership to move toward general operating grants? I think you talked about general operating grants, Brenda talked about general operating grants, and also how did you determine which organizations are led by and serving BIPOC communities if you don't currently have relationships with some organizations?
Oh, great questions. So we have I'm lucky in that I came into an organization that had already built a process and a belief around best practices. So there was definitely already at the board level an agreement that we were going to try to adopt best practices. And I think Melissa has been at this work longer than I have, as Kathleen too, really. I mean, I think it's been a very long time that the idea of general operating support grants has been a best practice. We're just all slow adopters, let's be honest, right? So I was lucky that our board was really bought into the idea of let's adopt best practices. So general operating support, when I came in, we moved more towards multi-year support. And we're going to try and push the envelope on that as well. When I first came in, the board, I want to mention one thing about trust-based philanthropy, and Brenda touched on this, and I want to just emphasize, it's impossible for a foundation to practice trust-based philanthropy if the board doesn't trust the staff. So building that trust is really important. And I think it's one of the questions that the board has to ask itself. If you hired this executive, how can you not then trust them to do this work, right? So that's kind of a cognitive dissonance. So that, I think, when you do that, and I was lucky enough to walk into, the board said to me when I first came in and I joined in October, they said, we set aside some money for you to make some initial grants because we thought you would want to put your signature on this. You'd want to be able to state something about who the foundation is becoming under your leadership, which was an incredible gift of trust and transparency. And it allowed me to make the first series of grants without requiring an application, to organizing based groups, and then to bring those leaders in to talk to the board and to meet them, so that we began to be in relationship right away. That kind of a process is where we have to go, right? So I would say that's incredibly important. Also, finding that brain trust as we did, I was bringing in people who are, to Melissa's point as well, there are intermediary organizations out there that you can use that are community accountable, that are led by people who have expertise in funding grassroots, BIPOC-led organizing groups. And I think about things like Solidaire, Groundswell Fund, the Emergent Fund, Borealis Fund, and then there are a lot more as well that, Hive Fund. Those are organizations that you can give resources to, then be in relationship and see how they're doing the regranting work. Then some of those regranting organizations can become your grantees as well. So I think that there is the possibility, we have many of the groups, the foundations and the Democracy Frontlines Fund, we funded that slate of 10 grantees, but now those foundations, Rockefeller, Sobrato, Schmidt Family Foundation, they are now going to take some of those organizations and also add them to their grantee portfolio list. So it's a process of learning and adding as we go. And really, again, going to those experts. So we don't have to think about continually only using the process of taking in grant applications, reviewing them by our staff. There are lots of different avenues by which we can become in relationship with organizations using a trust-based process.
I can just jump in here and add a couple of different points. And Crystal, I think we're not only slow adopters, we're power hoarders. And I think that the challenge with general ops for many organizations are that how do we demonstrate that something happened? How are we accountable? How are we meeting our fiduciary duty? I mean, these are all the kinds of things I've heard over the years as to why organizations, including ones that I've worked at, do not want to do general operating support. And so how do we start engaging in that power dynamic conversation and the need to see power? I think the other thing is we spend so much time focused internally as a business model, right? Creating dockets, doing due diligence, writing things up for boards, that we actually never get out of our offices. So how are you going to find these people? Get out there, get out of your office and go out into the community and learn and meet people who are doing the important equity work in your communities, and then build a relationship and then give them the money and get out of the way.
Absolutely. Crystal, you were going to say something. I saw you No, you're all good. Okay, great. So
I was just going to
around-
mention Mackenzie Scott as a model of, some of this. I mean, she is just, giving money and getting out of the way in huge amounts. And I want to know who was in her ear to get her to give in that way. And that, because it's pretty powerful and transformative for those organizations.
Absolutely. So Brenda, you touched earlier about getting out there and getting out into communities to know the organizations and getting out of the way. There's a question in the audience is asking, how did you, or this for anybody, but specifically, how do you determine which organizations are led by and serving BIPOC communities? If you don't currently have relationships with some of those organizations, how do you know if the organizations doesn't lead with that on their websites, et cetera? It's not appropriate to do a look test, quote unquote, on websites. Just curious how we better understand and know which organizations are led by and serving BIPOC communities. That's the questions. So the question is specifically looking at communities. If you don't have a relationship with them, how do you know?
So I'll just jump in here real quick. One is to say that, knowledge is a skill that you can outsource and you can find people to help you, right? So that's number one. Number two is, as some of us have mentioned, Crystal, as well as others, there are collaborative funds that exist to serve this very purpose, right? So to take an international example, you don't have to figure out who's really doing the work to help women in Cambodia. You can fund the Global Fund for Women, and it's their responsibility to figure that out, right? And it's a much more efficient way to do it. So there are lots of ways to appropriately get this kind of information or access, whether through engaging outside resources to help you or participating in a collaborative fund whose job it is to do that.
Yeah, and I would also add to that, looking at it from a community lens perspective, you mentioned the global. If we look at it from a local lens, partnerships, individuals, community folks know other community folks. Community organizations know what other community organizations are doing and who is doing what. And so back to the point that Crystal and Brenda made about getting out there, getting out of the way, and while being out of the way is about relationship building and continuing those relationships to know who's doing what on the groundwork.
And Crystal, can I just ask you to say for the audience what you mean by BIPOC-led? Because I know you probably don't just mean they have a person as the CEO. So do you mind sharing that?
Sure. For us, the question goes to the perspective of two pieces. One, multiple levels of leadership that are coming from that community. So it would be an executive, but it would also be board members, majority board members. It would also be majority senior staff. And it is really important for us that there is a layer of community accountability in that as well, right? So that these are organizations that that came up from an issue that the community identified, as opposed to just a service model organization that is applying a certain set of things to an organization, to a community. So, you see this actually in real life, right? So many of the community clinics came up because a group of people got together 30, 40 years ago and said, we're tired of our kids being sick and not having any place to go and see a doctor or a nurse, right? So some of those organizations have continued to maintain that community-oriented perspective in terms of their leadership. Some have not. And it's pretty clear and pretty easy when you get to know organizations which ones those are. Environmental justice organizations, which is clearly a big health issue. A lot of them are really mama powered, right? Those are powered by moms who got together and said, our kids have too much asthma. We're going to fight against that, coal producing plant or that, industry in our neighborhood that is responsible for polluting our air. And we are going to be the people who are going to come together. Now, those organizations are also the same ones that pivoted and began to do mutual aid during COVID, that provided other services to people, that helped to make sure people knew how to register to vote if they needed to. So many of those organizations don't necessarily just look like health serving organizations, but they are, when you get to know them, groups that are led by and for the people in the community, that have people of color at all levels of leadership and are responsive to the needs of that community, not just identifying a funding stream to provide a service to individual people in that community. Is that helpful?
Thank you.
Thanks, Crystal. That's very helpful. I think some of us working in the from that racial equity work framework of looking at Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and people of color perspective. When we think about what does that mean for an organization that's led that way, how do we? It's important to define it, right? And how do we define it? So thank you, Kathleen, and thank you, Crystal. As we, if there's another question from our audience. And at a time where many in the field are moving towards more trust-based practices, our board has unprecedented interest in outcomes and theories of change. Is there, quote unquote, theory of change, unquote, for trust-based philanthropy? That will convert my board I will not convert my board anytime soon. So need to think about how to talk about trust-based practices using the impact outcomes language that they are more comfortable with.
So I'm smiling because this is sort of the perennial challenge that I have faced in my career, right? Of like, how are we going to demonstrate impact? How are we going to like show that? A lot of times coming from the boards, but I also think that sometimes it comes from foundation leaders who blame the boards, but really are leaders that don't get out of the way. And what I can tell you is that you can continue to use that kind of language and those kinds of tools, but still be trust-based. So for example, at Headwaters, we do actually have a theory of change, believe it or not. But our theory of change was not something that I wrote, my staff wrote, an expert wrote, a consultant wrote. It was something that the community defined. These are the things that we want to do. And this is how we know it will be successful. And guess what? We don't want pie charts and graphs and all the things that we try to do. We want to be able to tell our story and storytelling as a data point, right? Of people saying, this is my lived experience. This is what we are doing. This is how it's having an impact in our community. And it's been a road to get my board to sort of see that as a way to tell the story of impact. And so I don't think you have to sort of like just eliminate, like this is not nilly-willy grant making is what I often say. We actually want there to be an outcome. The partners that we have on the ground want there to be a difference. We want to end health disparities. So it's not like we're just giving money away to give money away. There is an aligned mission and vision that we want for Headwaters here in Western Montana. And that's what's driving the theory of change. That's what's driving what information we're looking at and why it is that for us, it's important to elevate the stories of our partners in the community. And I can say what has been helpful, at least from my experience at Headwaters, is to bring other board members from other foundations that have had that mind shift. My former board chair was somebody who, when I first was hired by him, he was like, I'm going to be sitting there reading proposals and actually making decisions and being held accountable for what outcomes we're going to have. Fast forward 4 years later, he's become one of the biggest cheerleaders on trust-based philanthropy, and he speaks to it so eloquently. And I think he would be, yeah, I'm going to throw him out there to the whole national audience, but he's someone like him that can come and talk to your board and share that experience and that perspective, and why it makes a difference, and why I think eventually we might be supporting work that eliminates the inequities that exist in our communities.
I'd love to add in, I think Brenda and I might have met because she spoke on theories of change at a GEO conference like 15 years ago. So, or maybe it was like longer than that, I don't know. So we have a theory of change at the council. Theories of change are not bad. The thing that is the lie we tell ourselves, is that project-based support gives us a better chance of measuring outcomes, that that holding tighter control gives us a better chance of success or performance. None of that is true, actually. You know, our money gets mixed up with a lot of other people's money in all cases all the time. So you're never tracking your specific money through to some end outcome on the ground, like full stop, unless you are, well, to be frank, McKinsey Scott, and you're giving people like billions. So you're giving your money and you're mixing it together with other people's money, and you want to just be able to claim that you contributed to this broader set of outcomes that an institution is able to achieve. So, you know, you're contributing, you're not, you know, causing, this is not a cause and effect thing because we are not the actors, we're giving money to the actors. So there's just a whole set of education that we need to bring our trustees through, because they have a mindset that is more akin to the corporate sector than it is to our sector. So it's just it's a process that apparently Brenda Salarzano is very good at. And we need to find ways that we all get better at, so that we can create a sophisticated set of philanthropic trustees who are well skilled at governing our types of institutions, and don't try to convert our types of institutions into corporate.
You know, I have to mention that, speaking of it, not to throw any board members out there as well, early on, our foundation is a restart of a foundation. We rebooted, restarted with an entirely new board and mission and such. And one of our board members, or as we restarted early on, was the individual who was very struck on, first of all, if you're not funding health, direct health, are you really impacting health? He was the individual who talked about, what does race have to do with health? He was the individual who talked about, the same individual who wanted the outcomes, who wanted to be very much on standardization. This same individual is now the individual who says, of course we have to fund the social determinants of health. Of course, race, we've got to lift up race. Even when it comes to investments, he's an individual in our finance committee who talks, as we were restarting our policy, we're putting together our investment policy, wanted to make sure that we included women and people of color in our vendors and in our fund managers as a priority. So again, this is the individual who now says, I want to hear the stories. I really want to hear the stories. Yes, financial statements are important, but I want to hear the stories that are out in our communities. So ultimately, if this person can change, we know that it is based on it's the stories, it's the data, it's the trust that is moving this and that is moving us in the direction we need to move towards. So based on that, we have another question from our audience. What are some examples of getting out of the way? What does that look like?
Well, since I threw that out there, I guess I probably need to give some specific examples, but I'm sure all three of you have other things. So getting out of the way for us has meant that we don't have LOIs and RFPs and all those application processes that normally nonprofits have to spend hours and hours submitting. We don't have grantee reports. That again, my experience is that, you know, you get grantee reports. If you're lucky, you read them. And even less frequently, you do something with them, quite honestly, as a field. And so we've eliminated that. We've eliminated dockets. So we don't actually spend a huge amount of our staff time putting together dockets and presenting those to the board. What this means is that we are just, instead of being gatekeepers, facilitating the access to the resources that we have the privilege of stewarding, and simplifying that, and allowing them, those organizations in Montana that are mission aligned with what it is that that Headwaters is caring about, can do with the resources that we have. And I think the other thing that I want to make sure is that our process to determine what we focused on was also informed by the community. It was a result of having 600 cups of coffee across Montana, community meetings in every county that we have, and listening and saying that they said that this is what we're going to work on. And so those are a few examples that I'd give of getting out of the way.
I'm not going to say something about getting out of the way. It's just something that a couple of you had pointed to that I wanted to lift up, which is about the process being part of the solution. And here that process is about building trust. You know, you built trust with the community in what the foundation was going to do, buy those 600 cups of coffee. Same with, in Crystal's case, you know, you're building trust by giving over, you know, the decision-making authority to grants to people who are seen as community leaders, who are community leaders, but who are seen by other community leaders as the folks that they trust. So, you know, this is part of the getting out of the way. It's also having process integrity that is, you know, that is also going to get you to better outcomes.
I echo every single thing that has been said here, and I just, you know, underline it, underscore it. It's so important. We also don't have applications, don't have reporting requirements. All of those things are incredibly important pieces. I just want to say to something else here. When we talk about trust, part of that is also because what our grantees actually want from us, as Brenda mentioned, is one, they want us to get out of the gatekeeping role, but then they want help. And in order to get help, right, we have to be having an honest conversation. Let's look at the reality for most foundations. We spend 3, 6, 9, 12 months through a grueling process in which we are basically sitting on opposite ends of the table with our grantee partners. We're saying, prove it, show us, demonstrate, not enough, come back with more information, right? Those are all the processes and activities that we're doing for the application process. And then we decide we're going to give them the grant. And then we say to them, now we're partners. We love you. We're on the same side of the table. And they're saying to us, no, we're not. We've been adversaries for a year now. We don't suddenly become best buddies, right? So we have set up a process that then requires that the program people spend the next couple of years trying to build a trusting relationship with the organizations, right? So if you really want to be effective, you have to first have honesty. And we have not had trusting relationships with our grantees in philanthropy because we have not been trustworthy. So if we become trustworthy, if we demonstrate that up front, then we actually have the opportunity to hear the truth. And when they say to us, we need other funders, our staff are spending more time trying to engage and educate and rally other funders than they are reviewing grantee proposals, right? So that's actually what nonprofits say that they want from us. They want us to listen. Our grantees more and more are doing webinars in which they're doing quarterly updates for funders about their work, right? We participate on those. We listen to those webinars. Our staff takes notes and puts that in the grant file as their report, right? Why do they need to do all of that individually for every separate foundation that is giving them a grant? right? We have to develop practices that make us trustworthy. Then we will hear the truth, and then we will actually be able to do the activities that our grantees say, this is going to help us be successful, right? Giving us 10 more rewrites on the grant proposal doesn't help us be successful.
Just want to follow up on that a little bit. I think I agree totally with all that's been said. I think one of the other factors in the philanthropy system that we really need to rewire are arbitrary rules, like you can only get 3 years of support. You're dealing with a 10-year issue, you can only get 3 years of support at a time. Or you can only get 3 grants, and then it's like 3 strikes and you're out of the ball game, right? For what reason? I don't know what reason that is. And the other big factor is what has never made sense to me is the forced turnover of program staff in some foundations, especially larger ones, which means that the person that you built the trusting relationship with, that you finally got to that point with after 2 or 3 years, is going to be gone in another 18 months. And by the way, by the time you get to that point with them, they're already looking for their next job and they're really not paying attention to you. All of those, none of those things make a lot of sense. And I really think we want to start thinking about operating models that look more like we're a talent agency. You're our talent. It's our job to make you successful. How do we make you successful? And not, we are your hall monitor and we're checking your homework. That's not what we should be doing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Melissa. Absolutely. Well, this has truly been a pleasure. I'm kind of, we've got one more question. If we could do it popcorn style, I think we can answer it. The final question: are you afraid at some point that you'll be accused of being the one to judge, put the stamp of approval on what agencies are worthy? Popcorn style. Let's go. Are you afraid of that? Brenda?
No.
Crystal? No?
I think I'm not, but I think that what the question raises for me is, what are you doing that requires you to be afraid? And if you're not afraid, you're not probably doing enough.
I guess I think of risk very differently, right? I think it's our job to take some risk. And it's our job to do the best that we can and be in regular and constant conversation. This is not done. It's not ever done. It's going back to what you said, it's both a destination and a journey. I guess I don't operate from fear. I'm trying to operate from love and trust.
I think we should always be asking, what is the risk of not doing this? Right? And that is often clearly far larger.
I guess where my brain went was, it's our time to own up to our privilege and our power and to use it and to let others in and to try to follow their lead. Because when we're putting our trust in others, they're going to put more trust in us, and then we're going to become more trustworthy, like Crystal said.
This is why I am so honored, and this has been such a privilege to be with all of you on this panel and moderating this really dynamic conversation as we kicked off the Grantmakers in Health Conference. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom, expertise.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you all. Wonderful talking with you.
Thank you, everyone.
Best luck.
Thank you so much, Maria, Melissa, Kathleen, Crystal, and Brenda, for a wonderful kickoff to our day and to our session. A couple of takeaways that I have is to start where you can, to build trust by being trustworthy, and now that we have our vaccines, to get out of the office and meet the people doing the important work. As part of that meeting and communication, we want to move next to our breakout sessions. We hope that you will participate in one of the 3 that we have in terms of listed here, and that our CEOs and foundation trustees will participate in the network session, and that you'll join us for the plenary at 4:45. Thank you again, and see you back soon.